It's one heck of a day to tune in. Here's a look at some of the stories our teams are reporting tonight.
I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now. To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel.
A former White House aide's stunning testimony before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. Cassidy Hutchinson says former President Trump lunged towards a Secret Service agent that infamous day. We'll explain why. It is Tuesday, which means another primary day ahead of the midterm elections. We'll take a look at the first contest since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. President Biden is meeting with other Western leaders at the NATO summit in Spain right now. On top of the agenda, helping Ukraine battle Russia's continued military assault and seeking ways to further isolate the Kremlin. And later this hour, states across the nation are working to move forward with their own laws regarding abortion after the Supreme Court ruled it is not protected by the Constitution. We'll show you the latest legal moves and challenges. Plus, we're getting new details about the seizure of attorney John Eastman's cell phone as federal agents ramp up efforts related to the January 6th investigation, what we know about attempts to get the phone back, and what agents may be searching for. But we begin with an unexpected day 6 of the January 6th committee hearings where Cassidy Hutchinson, a former aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, provided new testimony about the days leading up to the Capitol riot and how that fateful day unfolded. Now, throughout the hearing, she discussed what then President Trump and his inner circle knew about the insurrection, including that members of the mob that gathered at the ellipse outside the Capitol were carrying weapons.
I recall Tony in conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles.
They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband.
8736 with the message that subject weapon on his right hip.
I believe when we got back to the White House, he said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers, and according to my notes, he then said he'd be fine with just riding the beast. But to that's my recollection, he wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
Mr. Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, "We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go up to the Capitol that day."
Ms. Hutchinson, did Rudy Giuliani ever suggest that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
He did.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
For more on today's hearing, I'm joined by Philip Bump. He's a national correspondent for The Washington Post. Philip, we heard some of the testimony there. Then President Trump wanted to go to the Capitol for the counting of the electoral votes. I want to quickly show you how Cassidy Hutchinson described that moment in her testimony.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel, and when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Testimony there that a sitting president put his own hands on his own Secret Service team is stunning enough. What jumped out at you, and did today's hearing move the needle, so to speak, politically when it comes to how this information is being received by the public?
I think what we saw today, and that account was probably the most surprising element of what was testified to today. Again, it was that I think it's worth noting that was her recalling what she'd been told by the Secret Service who was in the vehicle with President Trump. But what the testimony broadly really did was show both that Donald Trump was absolutely indifferent to the threat being posed at the Capitol, that he was aware of that there were weapons, that he didn't see them as posing a threat to himself, but then that he was absolutely furious with the fact that he wasn't able to go to the Capitol, as he had both announced to the crowd and been agitating for days prior. That scene in that vehicle of him being so angry absolutely comports with what we understood about Donald Trump's reaction on that day, which is that he very much felt this was it, this was the moment, and that he stood and watched the rioters entering the Capitol with something at least approximating approval.
And it's not just that. The other detail which was key that Ms. Hutchinson testified to was that not only did the former president know, not only was he informed by his team that some of his supporters near the ellipse were armed, he wanted the security protocols relaxed. He said, according to her, quote, "They're not going to hurt me," and to get rid of the devices and machines, the mags that would have detected weapons. How does that help this committee's overall goal here in proving intent when it comes to what was happening in President Trump's mind?
Well, it's absolutely key, right? So he's having this rally at the Ellipse, and anyone who wants to go to that rally, and he wanted as many people there as possible, anyone who went to it had to go through these metal detectors. And as they were going through the metal detectors, the testimony they had today was that they were finding a lot of things on these folks, a lot of weapons. Trump was informed about that, said instead of screening people faster, he said just get rid of the metal detectors. He wasn't worried about the threat. He knew that they had weapons, but he wasn't worried about the threat to him. So the implication is, who were those weapons meant to threaten? Obviously, the answer is members of Congress. He understood that there were people in the audience who had ill intent towards people who weren't him, and he encouraged them to then move to the Capitol afterward. That is hugely significant when you're talking about whether or not Donald Trump was in the mindset of trying to spur people to the Capitol to potentially engage in something akin to violence. That certainly indicates that he knew that risk was present, and he did nothing to stop it from happening.
Now, what's also interesting is that there have been supporters of the president who participated in January 6th and afterwards who have said that they realized they were misled. Certainly when they're faced with any type of criminal or judicial, type justice. Mr. Trump posted to his social media platform to insult Ms. Hutchinson. He says he barely knows her, which, when you think back to how the former president behaves, that's typical when anyone in his inner circle goes out publicly against him. However, what do you make of that defense? He also says he never put his hands on his Secret Service agents, that the story Ms. Hutchinson is saying is made up. But what of those who support former President Trump? Folks are in the millions. Is this different? Is this testimony and what's being said something that may change minds?
It's a great question. I think we've already seen some polling which suggests that people are paying attention to this and maybe their minds are changing in terms of Donald Trump's culpability for that day. It's just so easy. Once you've been spending 6 years, what's it been, 7 years, is dismissing Donald Trump's falsehoods, it's very easy to just dismiss, to dismiss another one, to ignore the fact that all the evidence points in the contrary direction. Hutchinson's testimony is already being disparaged as being hearsay, as being secondhand, as being, all the, is contrived, or that she didn't have this senior role. Look, Donald Trump, I'm sure the January 6th committee would be extremely happy to have him come and sit and testify under oath. Hutchinson did that. She's testifying under oath. She, if she is lying, she faces legal repercussions for doing that. Donald Trump doesn't. When he's on Truth Social, he doesn't face those repercussions. It's not going to matter to his base, but it's a very clear distinction for anyone who is an impartial observer here. Under oath versus not under oath, you sort of got to give the benefit of the doubt to Ms. Hutchinson.
Phil, it's such an important point to make. Testimony in this setting on this topic comes with legal consequences. So it's not the type of thing that folks are just posting on social media or saying is their opinion. Co-chair Liz Cheney also shared what sounded like subtle threats that she says the committee witnesses have been receiving should they cooperate. Let's just listen to a portion of that.
Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is, as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee."
Phil, what do you think? Why is Congresswoman Cheney waiting until now to share this? What point is she making?
Well, I think she's waiting until now because they've been very careful about how they roll this out in order to have the most effect. And I think that she dropped that at the end of the hearing in part so that people would be intrigued. You know, I mean, this is being produced very much as sort of a television series, and I think that's intentional. But you know, this is a pattern we've seen from Trump repeatedly. These sorts of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Goodfellas-esque sorts of backdoor threats to people, which is very much what's conveyed there. You know, I've seen some speculation on social media that this was contrived or fake. There's no reason to doubt that someone in Donald Trump's sphere said something along those lines. When we heard the testimony from Michael Cohen, his former attorney, who used to do that sort of for a living for Donald Trump, he would make those sorts of threats. I think it's very likely that's real. And my guess is, based on the way the committee has been unrolling this stuff in the past, that we're probably going to hear fairly soon about who said that and who they were referring to.
Yeah, and those of us who have followed the former president's Twitter feed extensively know full well when he likes what someone's saying, they're the smartest person in the world. When he doesn't, the opposite is true. Phil Bum, thanks so much. Great to chat with you. Thanks for joining us today. For more on all of this, I'm joined by Florida Democratic Representative Stephanie Murphy. She's also a member of the January 6th committee. Congresswoman Murphy, thank you for your time today. We've watched as this former White House aide testified that former President Trump knew full well people were armed at his rally at the Ellipse on January 6th. Let's just listen to a portion of the testimony.
He was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation, that people couldn't come through the mags because they had weapons?
Correct.
And that people, and his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the Ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing mags away, they're not here to hurt me, let them in, let my people in, they can march to the Capitol after the rally's over, they can march from the Ellipse, take the effing mags away, then they can march to the Capitol.
That portion of the testimony really striking people. Hutchinson also detailed a number of things which could effectively rise to the level of criminal prosecution, not just pushing to relax security for protesters known to be armed, but assaulting a Secret Service agent. Ultimately, do you feel that is where this hearing is headed?
Where the committee is headed is to gather all of the facts, lay them out for the American people, and then provide legislative recommendations on how we better secure the Capitol as well as our democracy. I think what Ms. Hutchinson did today was she took us inside the White House in the remaining days before January 6th and on January 6th to let us know what the president knew and when. And it's clear that he knew that he had called supporters to Washington, that they were armed, but he wasn't worried that they were a threat to him. And yet still he sent them to the Capitol. And then when he knew that the Capitol was under attack, he didn't do anything about it. And I think, the important thing to understand about this is that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was not a spontaneous event. It was part of a months-long effort for the sitting president to try to retain power when he knew he had lost and had been told he had lost.
What was your just personal reaction as an American when you first learned of this testimony, the behavior of a sitting president refusing to accept the loss that the public gave him?
As an American, I was deeply disappointed, but as a person who was a refugee from a country that did not have democracy, I was very scared. I know how fine of a line it is between a country that is a democracy until it isn't, and it takes every American citizen and good elected officials of good character to defend our Constitution and to do what's right. And we have seen a lot of Republicans testify in front of this committee who have said when they were asked to help him cheat to win, they felt that their oath to the Constitution was greater than that request, and they did what was right.
And so you said the committee's laying out just the case and the kind of facts as they are. What outcome do you think would be appropriate?
I think the right outcome is for us to look at all the ways in which the president tried to subvert our processes and try to better create guardrails against future electeds who try to do the same thing. In a democracy, we should not have anyone other than the people decide who gets to be president. And I think we came dangerously close in this situation. You saw the president pressure the Department of Justice to find election fraud where there was not. You saw the president pressure state electors to put forward fake electors when they knew the president had not won. And you saw the president pressure the vice president to just call the race in his favor. And luckily, in all of those cases, those people resisted that pressure.
Now, this hearing comes after your fellow committee member, Representative Raskin, said the committee's received, quote, a deluge of new evidence since it's been holding these hearings. Characterize some of what we may see and hear next.
Our investigation is fluid. We are constantly receiving additional information. And as you heard the chairman say today in the hearing, we invite folks who may have had some memory lapses when they came in front of us, or may have information that they have yet to present, or who have to date decided not to cooperate with the committee. We invite them to come and speak with the committee and share what they know. Our door is wide open, and we will be sharing the information that we gather with the American people in a way that I hope is digestible, and in a way that I hope they'll be able to set aside their partisan affiliations and just see the facts for what they are, and also want to guard our country against any future elected leader from trying to hold on to power in ways that are unconstitutional and potentially corrupt.
We've also been hearing what sounds like potential witness tampering. Congresswoman Liz Cheney detailing some of that at the end of today's hearing, which often has been a tease to what we will hear next. What can you tell us on that front?
What I will say is that we do ask many of our witnesses as to whether or not they have received outreach and pressure that would interfere with the way that they testify in front of our committee. We take these concerns very seriously, and as the Vice Chair said, we plan on having a conversation as a committee to determine what we will do next about it. But it is a serious, serious effort to disrupt the committee's work, and we take that seriously.
It's interesting, too, just as someone on the outside watching this, that you are actively trying to gather new evidence from more people while noting that there is an effort, it seems, to make sure witnesses stay loyal to the former president. I also want to ask just more questions about you. You've announced that you will not be seeking re-election. You've alluded to your personal story, something that seems to be relevant in this climate as far as the value of democracy. What went into your decision? And what would you like for folks to remember about your time in service? And why are you doing this?
I'm a working parent, like so many working parents all across this country, and sometimes you have to balance your personal responsibilities with your professional aspirations. But I hope that the American people will remember that in some of our darkest moments here as a nation, that I gave my best to her.
Representative Stephanie Murphy, thank you very much for your time today.
Great to be with you.
Voters are heading to the polls for primary elections today, the first since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The primaries are being held in 5 states today, including New York, Illinois, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Utah. Incumbent New York Governor Kathy Hochul is going up against 2 challengers to her left and right. She took over after Governor Andrew Cuomo resigned last year. In Colorado, Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters is one of 3 Republicans running in today's primary for Colorado Secretary of State. Peters is currently charged in an elections tampering investigation and has pleaded not guilty. Colorado's current Secretary of State, that's Democrat Jen Griswold, is running unopposed in her primary. Over in Illinois' 15th district, incumbent Republicans are facing off because of redistricting. Representative Rodney Davis is going up against Representative Mary Miller. You see them on your screen there. Miller is endorsed by former President Trump. At a recent campaign rally, she said the Supreme Court's overturning Roe versus Wade was a, quote, historic victory for white life. Her campaign says she misread prepared remarks. Now, while President Biden and other world leaders hash out details on how best to aid Ukraine, First Lady Jill Biden is working to help millions of Ukrainians displaced by Russia's military aggression. She spoke with our Nancy Cordes about those efforts and much more. We'll show you. Plus, authorities make several arrests after a truck full of migrants was found abandoned in the Texas heat, killing more than 50 people. We'll bring you the latest on the investigation. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there are hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail. We experience the weather in a whole new way.
President Biden arrived in Spain Tuesday for a 2-day NATO summit aimed at strengthening foreign efforts to aid Ukraine. In talks with the Spanish Prime Minister, President Biden vowed to increase U.S. military presence in Europe and denounced Russia's recent deadly attacks on eastern and central Ukraine.
And as I said before the war started, if Putin attacked Ukraine, the United States would enhance our force posture in Europe and respond to the reality of a new European security environment.
The president's remarks come shortly after Russian forces fired deadly missile attacks on the Ukrainian capital city of Kyiv and the central city of Kremenchuk. Spanish officials say Russia's invasion of Ukraine represents a violation of international law and an attack on shared NATO values. First Lady Jill Biden says she is now working with the spouses of other world leaders to help the millions of Ukrainians displaced by Russia's military assault. Mrs. Biden spoke after visiting a center for displaced Ukrainians in Spain. An estimated 8 million Ukrainians have fled their homes since the beginning of Russia's invasion. More than 70,000 of them are being temporarily housed in the United States. Our Nancy Cordes has more.
Errol, one White House official is describing this as the most consequential NATO summit of the 21st century. And that's because of what we just saw here in Madrid with one NATO member, Turkey, finally dropping its opposition to two countries that are seeking membership, Finland and Sweden. It came after weeks of negotiations. Turkey's president says he is not going to stand in the way any longer. Sweden and Finland have been famously neutral for decades, but all of that changed when Russia invaded one neighbor, Ukraine, and that made other neighbors like the Nordic countries very nervous. Their admission into this alliance is a sign that Putin's attempts to destabilize NATO have backfired. Now NATO is actually reinvigorated. Countries are committed to spending more on defense and putting more troops along NATO's border with Russia. Now, as President Biden was meeting with NATO allies here in Madrid, his wife was doing some diplomacy of her own outside Madrid. We followed along as she visited a Ukrainian refugee center on the outskirts of Madrid. She said that she made a promise when she met with the First Lady of Ukraine last month that she would continue to highlight the plight of the 8 million or so Ukrainians who have been displaced from their country, who left with almost nothing and who may continue to need assistance from European nations, from the U.S., from other countries for years to come. I talked to her about why this is so important to her. She says that she has reached out to other first ladies and that they are all working to highlight this issue. And she also weighed in for the first time about the Supreme Court decision last week overturning Roe v. Wade. She said the only way to restore abortion rights is for Congress to pass a law codifying those rights, but Democrats don't have the votes right now to do it, Errol.
All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you very much. At least 51 people are dead after a truck full of migrants was found abandoned in the sweltering Texas heat on Monday. Authorities have made several arrests and are now looking for other suspects. Our Omar Villafranca brings us the latest from San Antonio.
The tragedy in South Texas continued to grow in scope on Tuesday. Federal officials tell CBS News they believe it's the deadliest human smuggling case in modern U.S. history. The grim discovery happened Monday on the side of the road in southwest San Antonio. A worker heard cries for help coming from a parked tractor trailer. Authorities say 46 migrants were dead on the scene. Others died later.
We're not supposed to open up a truck and see stacks of bodies in there.
More than a dozen survivors were hospitalized, including several children.
The patients that we saw were hot to the touch. They were suffering from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, no signs of water in the vehicle. It was a refrigerated tractor trailer, but there was no visible working AC unit on that rig.
Temperatures in the area on Monday ranged from the upper 90s to the low 100s.
If it's 100 outside, it goes for about 125 degrees inside without water, without air, without nothing. It's ridiculous.
The truck was found near Interstate 35, a highway that runs from the Texas-Mexico border to Minnesota and is often used by smugglers.
This is nothing short of a horrific human tragedy.
Investigators say 3 suspects were taken into custody at another location. They are still looking for the driver of the truck and anyone else who might have been involved. Omar Villafranca, CBS News, San Antonio, Texas.
As protests continue over the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, the Biden administration is promising to take action. So what might that look like? Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus, joins us next to discuss that and what a national women's strike might look like. Also, we're learning more about criminal investigations involving close Trump associates and the January 6th insurrection. We'll bring you the latest on former Trump lawyer John Eastman and what officials are hoping to learn from him. You're streaming CBS News.
He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass. but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year. I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them their hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's going to bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
Welcome back to Red and Blue, everyone. Glad you're still with us. Here's a quick look at some of the top stories we're tracking for you right now. The FDA is recommending updated COVID vaccine boosters, which specifically target the Omicron variant. An advisory panel says a new formula of boosters should be ideally ready by the fall. President Biden is attending a NATO summit in Spain. Member nations are expected to shift their aid to Ukraine to more offensive weapons to combat Russia's military aggression. President Biden said he believes the alliance is more galvanized than ever. The Biden administration is suggesting potential executive actions to protect women's access to abortion services following the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. At the same time, lawsuits are mounting in states that immediately banned abortion following the High Court's decision. Our Skylar Henry has more on this for you.
Abortion rights demonstrators hung their message to President Biden from the top of a crane in Washington, D.C.
Today, we dropped a banner asking President Biden to take action, executive action, to protect abortion.
This is a critical moment in our history.
Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra says his department has been planning for the High Court's decision to strike down Roe v. Wade for some time. Tuesday, he unveiled the Biden administration's action plan, which includes increasing access to abortion medication, ensuring privacy for patients and providers, and directing Medicare and Medicaid to protect family planning services, including emergency and long-acting contraceptives. Secretary Becerra says all options are on the table, but he declined to give specifics on how the Biden administration will implement its plan.
We can't tell you there's a silver bullet. It takes a little time because we want to do it right and we want to do it according to the law.
Meanwhile, a new legal battle is already underway in states across the country, particularly in many of the 13 states that have in place laws that automatically ban abortion. State court judges in Utah, Louisiana, and Texas have temporarily blocked enforcement of their so-called trigger laws.
Is this a Band-Aid over something that ultimately is the inevitable?
I think they are buying time. I do not think most of them will ultimately be successful.
Soon, voters will also weigh in, with abortion-related measures already on the ballot in several states in the coming months. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the Supreme Court.
For more on this, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who represents Washington State's 7th Congressional District, joins us now to discuss. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. You've been a vocal critic since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade on Friday. You're now proposing a national women's strike. How would that work exactly, and what would it achieve in the short term for the women who need these services?
Well, Errol, it's good to be with you. The main thing, I think is really important is we have to keep up the heat in the streets. We have to keep up the momentum to make it clear to Republicans across the country who are running in states and also Republicans in Congress who have refused to vote to codify Roe v. Wade and actually spent decades installing a Republican-controlled radical extremist Supreme Court. So a national strike is just an idea at this moment. We are doing some of the initial conversations to see if this could become a reality. But I take the lesson from Iceland in 1975 when 90% of women across Iceland went on strike in their homes and in their businesses, and they were protesting the unequal treatment of women. And what happened is the country came to a complete halt, because what we have to understand is that women's reproductive rights and freedom, the choice to make decisions about our own body, is deeply tied to the economic future of any country. And so by calling for a strike, if we're able to do that, I think it really showcases the reality of how we need women in the workplace and how bans on abortion are going to stop pregnant people across this country from being able to engage in economic activity.
That's interesting. The Iceland approach, I guess the point I would make is that's a country of, 360,000 people versus the United States, more than 320 million. It's a different beast here. But I want to also point you to this. We've had polling recently showing 2/3 of Americans supported keeping Roe v. Wade. That the sentiment of the country seems to be for protecting these rights. As chair of the Progressive Caucus, though, what conversations are you having with the White House about what specifically can be done now? There seems to be frustration among many Democrats, online and in person, about the fact that they may have Congress, they may have the White House, but it doesn't seem to make a difference when it comes to this issue. So how do you convince them something can be done?
Well, let me say the frustration is with the Republicans for refusing to vote to codify the Women's Health Protection Act, which Democrats in the House have passed. We have a simple majority in the House. We were able to pass that. In the Senate, as you know, Errol, there is the filibuster, which essentially gives power to 40% of senators to block a bill from even being debated on the floor of the Senate, much less being passed. And we need, let's be really frank, we need a couple of more pro-choice Democrats who could vote to essentially carve out or overturn the filibuster in order to pass critical civil rights legislation like the Women's Health Protection Act. And so that is why it is complicated for the White House. Their hands are somewhat tied with the Hyde Amendment, which prevents essentially federal funds from being used for abortion. And I think what the White House is starting to propose, and I'm glad that Secretary Becerra came out with a series of actions today. We have a couple more that we're going to put together and send to the White House. But this is the beginning. Let's make sure medication abortion is available to people. Let's make sure that we are not, the Department of Justice does not participate in criminalizing women who cross state lines to get abortion care. There are all kinds of places where the White House can apply the pressure of agencies to also make sure that pregnant people across this country, families, are receiving information on the range of reproductive health services that they need, including abortion, even if abortions can't be performed with federal funds. So there are a number of things that we think the administration is beginning to lay out. I think, the frustration is obviously people would have wanted to see it 48 hours ago, 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago. And also, I think there's an opportunity for the president to be very vocal about this issue, bring women who have had abortions and the complexity of their situations into the White House, do a national town hall on this issue, make it clear that we are not going back and we are going to take on this radical extremist Supreme Court.
What's remarkable to me, speaking to you as someone who supports abortion rights and you want women to have access to this, is what you're not saying. You're not saying any change is coming anytime soon. You're not saying that this will be easy. In fact, the solutions that you just point to require a whole long and sustained effort to elect people that would support carving this out once elected. And so I wonder what you say now to a young woman, let's say in Mississippi, in the South, in a place where abortions are illegal, perhaps women of color who are more susceptible to suffer from the inability to travel to get these services. What do you say to those young women who today are full of fear, concern, and worry because they cannot take care of their own health?
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about, Errol, is that there are states like mine, Washington State, where abortion is legal. And one of the things that we are doing is states where abortion is legal, we are getting together. In fact, the governor has announced the governor of my state has announced a coalition with Washington, Oregon, and California. We're all working to figure out how we can expand our access to include women from other states, whether it's Mississippi, Idaho, wherever it is, Nebraska, states that are banning abortion now. So there is work happening right at this moment to try to expand the capacity that we have in states where it is legal to be able to help other women in other states. But you're right. And let me tell you, as a longtime organizer for civil, human, immigrant rights, what I know is that these fights are not quick. And the Republican attempt to essentially take over the Supreme Court, and it's now a Supreme Court that I think has very little legitimacy anymore because it is so wildly out of step with the American people, is something that has been going on for 30 years. So what we need to do, we can make a difference in November by very clearly electing 2 more pro-choice Democrats and overturning or carving out the filibuster right after November to codify this into law. Separate from that, we do have a broken system in the Senate. I have called for, and the Progressive Caucus has been adamant about the need to eliminate the filibuster because, Errol, what's happened is in the vacuum of Congress not acting, whether it's on gun violence, whether it's on abortion, whether it's on, any number of things, the Equality Act, so many things. In the absence of Congress not acting, the Supreme Court, now radicalized, now extremist Republican-controlled Supreme Court, is acting to take away rights that have been the law of the land for over half a century. That is unprecedented. Don't let anybody tell you that Plessy v. Ferguson was the same thing and that there has been precedent for overturning. That was not the same thing. Plessy did not confer or take away a constitutional right in the way that Roe did. And now, after 50 years, this is unprecedented. So yes, This is not a quick fight. And what I would say to that woman in Mississippi is that we will do everything we can to help you now. And we need people in the streets. We need to elect people who will change these broken systems. And remember, every civil rights struggle in the history of our country or our world has not been accomplished quickly. We will have to do what it takes to make sure that we actually have the power in our houses and fix our broken election system.
It's a sobering discussion on the enormity of the challenge ahead for you. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, thank you for joining CBS News today.
Thank you, Errol.
As the House January 6th committee continues its investigation into the Capitol insurrection, so too is the Department of Justice. The DOJ is prosecuting contempt of Congress charges referred by the committee, as well as prosecuting people who actually stormed the Capitol. Scott McFarlane's been following it all from the beginning and has more. Scott?
Hey, Errol, America has now heard from Cassidy Hutchinson, but this committee has still not fully heard from her former boss, Mark Meadows. So it's worth reminding folks the 4 individuals this committee has recommended for contempt of Congress prosecution. It includes Mark Meadows for defying the committee's subpoena. It includes Trump's social media manager, Dan Scavino. The Justice Department has declined to prosecute these 2. But they are prosecuting 2 others. Peter Navarro, the former White House trade advisor, set to go on trial for contempt of Congress in November. There's also Of course, Steve Bannon, the former campaign manager for Donald Trump, set to go on trial in July for contempt of Congress. We know he spoke with the president leading up to and on January 6th. Bannon, we should note, has requested the January 6th committee members to actually appear and testify at his trial. There's also that other prosecution, the largest prosecution in U.S. history, the Justice Department prosecution of the rioters. 840 federal defendants as of now. About a third of them have pleaded guilty, which means there are hundreds more still on a trajectory towards trial. Errol, these are trials that will last well into 2023, if not 2024.
All right, Scott MacFarlane, thank you very much. Now, we've been reporting on many details from the sixth hearing from the committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Testimony from former Trump administration aide Cassidy Hutchinson revealed new information about the former president's knowledge of weapons protesters brought to what was a deadly riot. Hutchinson also disclosed a potential altercation between Trump and a Secret Service agent. Tuesday's hearing comes 1 week after authorities seized the phone of former Trump attorney John Eastman as part of its investigation into the Capitol attack. Joining me now with more is CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Scango, also here in the D.C. Bureau. Nicole, always great to see you. In the testimony we all watched Tuesday, Cassidy Hutchinson said former President Trump expressed anger that the crowd was so small. She says he subsequently demanded metal detectors be removed so those who had weapons could move more easily. What security implications are raised by that testimony and that detail?
Good to be with you, Errol. That's right. According to Hutchinson's testimony, the former president was, quote, very concerned about the shot, namely the image of his supporters gathering around the White House ellipse to listen to his speech on January 6th. And specifically, the former president was angry that screening of rally-goers by U.S. Secret Service officers were blocking his armed supporters from entering into the ellipse. Hutchinson says that moments before the former president took the stage, she heard him yelling at his advisors, something to the effect of, I don't care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Mags meaning magnetometers used to detect weapons on rally goers. And beyond this, today's testimony revealed that on the morning of January 6th, Secret Service and law enforcement had spotted Trump supporters carrying guns, including AR-15s and Glocks. And beyond that, news of those kinds of weapons were relayed at a meeting with the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, at around 10 or 10:15 a.m. Now, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Anthony Ornato reported during that briefing, according to Hutchinson, that people had knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. I was outside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and do have a distinct memory of seeing some of those weapons, certainly flagpoles and body armor, deployed by rioters, including members of the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and 3 Percenters. But Meadows, according to today's testimony, did not even look up from his phone during that White House briefing, and these revelations are significant because they offer new information about warnings of violence clearly understood by top White House aides who ultimately failed to react to any of it in real time. For his part, the former president directed people towards the Capitol during his speech on the ellipse, despite express knowledge of his armed supporters. We know that Attorney General Merrick Garland has been watching these hearings. The question now, are there legal implications here? We also learned today that was certainly top of mind for White House counsel on January 6th, who did everything in their power to keep the president from driving to the U.S. Capitol after his speech. Hutchinson says Pat Cipollone told her, quote, we're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Hutchinson also testified, you mentioned that effort for the president to get to the Capitol, his staff saying not a good idea. She testified that former President Trump lunged to grab the steering wheel from the head of his Secret Service detail and then grabbed the agent's neck. Really explosive testimony. Any response from the Secret Service, which I know says as little as possible?
Yeah, that's right. This was another big revelation from today's testimony after his speech. Then President Trump returning to his limousine, which is called the Beast, and literally trying to wrestle the steering wheel away from his Secret Service detail to go to the Capitol after it was deemed too dangerous, according to Hutchinson. And what's notable, you mentioned, beyond the outrageous nature of a president wrestling with his own security detail, is also the rarity of such information sharing. You know, historically, Secret Service agents don't share any details pertaining to interactions with their protectees because those kinds of disclosures can interfere with the agency's mission, you know, namely protecting the president, the White House, the first family, top staff. That job requires a relationship built on a lot of trust. So the prospect of sharing some of those intimate details, you know, typically creates concerns within the agency. Today's testimony was a very unique peeling back of that curtain. We do know, according to a Secret Service spokesperson, every single member of the Secret Service who is requested by the committee has provided to them testimony. The agency has said they are fully supportive and cooperative with the work of the January 6th committee, and that means both requests for appearances by Secret Service officials and documentation. According to a statement out today, Secret Service says they will continue to do so, including by responding on the record to the committee regarding the new allegations surfaced today.
All right. Maybe we'll find out more there. I wouldn't count on it, knowing how mum the Secret Service is on just about everything. I want to also ask you about John Eastman, former President Trump's lawyer. A week ago, his cell phone was seized by the FBI. He was part of, according to what we've heard at the hearings, really the person trying to develop the scheme, the legal path for President Trump to overturn the 2020 election results. What do we know about the seizure of his device and Eastman's subsequent lawsuit?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Errol. John Eastman, best known for devising a failed strategy to keep President Trump in office by pressuring former Vice President Mike Pence to avert certification of the 2020 election. And last week, federal agents seized his phone. That's according to a new lawsuit that he filed in New Mexico Monday, calling the behavior improper. Eastman alleging that federal agents approached him with a search warrant for any electronic and digital devices on him, then later transported those devices to D.C. or a Justice Department forensic lab in Northern Virginia, according to those court documents. Now, Eastman also claims in the lawsuit the agents frisked him before he was forced to provide biometric data to open his iPhone 12. Eastman filed Monday's lawsuit in an attempt to try and force the Justice Department to return that phone to him. He's not alone. Agents from the Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General also raided the home of former DOJ official Jeffrey Clark last week. Now, both of these attorneys, Eastman and Clark, notoriously issued advice to the former president and were in close contact with the White House in the weeks before January 6th. Certainly, these communications of both aides and dozens of others remain at the core of the Justice Department's January 6th investigation, Errol.
More to come there as well. Nicole Skanger, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will be right back. You're streaming Red and Blue on CBS News.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
In a CBS News exclusive, the man who tried to assassinate President Ronald Reagan some 41 years ago, John Hinckley Jr., sits down for his first TV interview since being fully released from all legal supervision. He tells our Major Garrett what he remembers from that time back in 1981 and what he hopes to do with his life now.
Who is John Hinckley?
I'm a person just trying to now become a good citizen and show the world that I'm not the person that I was 41 years ago.
What are your memories of that John Hinckley from 1981?
I was isolated. That was the main thing. I was isolated from my family, and that was not good.
Did you isolate yourself?
Yes.
Why?
I had depression. I just wanted to go within with my depression, and I guess I just got estranged from my family, and of course that led to more depression and isolation. I had delusions. And you know, it's so long ago now. I can't relate to who that person was. I really can't.
You've asked God for forgiveness?
Oh yes.
Many times?
Many, yes.
Is that a painful process for you or a redemptive process?
It's not painful. It's just I in my prayers ask for forgiveness, and you know, I pray for the families of the victims, and
to this day you do.
Yes,
that?
I do. Yes, I do.
Hinckley lives in Williamsburg, Virginia, and hopes to make a career as a singer-songwriter.
I just think it's my whole life experience. You know, it's so unusual that, I mean, I don't know anybody else who's certainly had a life like I've had. And my songs now, I mean, when I tell people now, if you want to get to know John Hinckley, listen to his songs, listen to my songs. Because sometimes I don't quite express myself that well just talking to somebody. But I think I express myself very well in my songs. I've had 3 concerts now canceled.
For the foreseeable future, public events are out.
Yeah, they are. I, more than anyone, was concerned about security at the event. I talked to the promoter of the show over and over about security.
Your security or theirs?
Mine and the audience.
What were you afraid of?
Nothing specifically, but we're, you know, as you well know, the environment of the country right now is not good, and I just wanted everybody to be safe.
What did you mean by that, and what do you see?
Well, I watch the news. Just watching the news now, it's just, there's just so much negativity going on, so much violence, and yeah, it's just, I think the climate of the country right now is just not good at all.
For the fans who want to buy tickets, what do you think they're coming to see? Do you think they're curious about what this person is, or do you think they're actually drawn to what they've heard?
It's both. I mean, I do actually have fans who like my music. I do have fans that listen to my songs on Spotify, mainly, and like my music, and therefore they would come to a concert to hear my music.
But they're also the curiosity.
The curious fans, just you know, to see me in person, this person they've heard about all these years.
All right, at this point, we will take a very short break, which means you have just a few minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can watch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. We've got a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
A federal appeals court is reconsidering an April ruling which allowed the government to require employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19. In early September, President Biden required more than 3.5 million federal workers to get COVID shots or face termination. Well, that mandate is now temporarily blocked as the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans debates an earlier ruling upholding that requirement. Despite legal arguments against it, more than 90% of federal employees were fully vaccinated by December of last year. A date for the hearing to discuss the mandate has not yet been set. And that does it for us today. But remember, you can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Stay where you are. There's more news for you after the break. You're streaming CBS News.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS.